Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call to order our regular council meeting at 6 p.m. and want to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Salish Nations, the Sayote Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. We express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia, and that they still have considerable interest in these lands today and in the future. Turning to approval of the agenda, I understand, we're looking for a mover and seconder to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Duncan. All in favor? Oh, to the agenda.
Yeah. Oh, sorry,
to the minutes?
To the minutes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll do it under we'll do it under minutes. So I appreciate the heads.
I know for myself.
Oh, thanks for the heads up. So to approve the agenda as presented, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. And we're now turning to public participation, and I invite anyone wishing to come forward this evening, please, to address council. I'll call for a second time if anyone wishes to come forward this evening. And for a third time, thank you. We'll close the public participation and go to our first item under bylaws, 5A, which is bylaw number 2275, our zoning bylaw. Final changes to reflect the new official community plan and new provincial housing legislation. And I'll turn to Mr. Newcomb for an introduction, please. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So following the introduction of the first version of the draft zoning bylaw in April and initial council feedback, the draft was then referred for community consultation in late April and early May. Following that community engagement period, staff summarized Community and Advisory Planning Commission feedback for council's further consideration and recommended some changes to the draft bylaw at the May 27th council meeting. At that meeting, council also directed some changes to the W1U zone, and staff committed to reporting back on some further considerations for permitted uses in the W1 and W1U zones. These are contained within the staff report on tonight's agenda for further consideration by council. All changes made to the bylaw at the May 27th meeting have now been incorporated into the document. Following council's decision on changes to the aforementioned zones and any other final changes made through resolution tonight, the bylaw may be given first and second readings. If resolutions are made that change content in the bylaw, council should specify that the bylaw readings are being given as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. And just a note to council, I think we're aware that we have 3 recommendations, but the second recommendation would be split out into 2 motions for first and second if and when we come to that. But I'll first turn to colleagues if there are any questions for Mr. Newcomb on the report. Thank you. Seeing none, I would look for a mover to start us off on the recommendations. Councillor Novek.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation. Number 1, that personal service establishment be removed as a permitted use in the W1-U zone of draft zoning bylaw number 2275.
Second.
Thank you. We have moved in second. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Nothing to add from what we've already heard.
Councillor Keith.
No, I think we covered it previously.
Thank you. Seeing no discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. Do you wish to continue, Councillor Novek?
Thank you. I move that the bylaw be given first reading.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Or sorry, we don't have discussion at first reading. I'll call a question. All in favor? That motion carries. Councillor Novek?
And I move that bylaw number 2275 be given second reading.
So, moved and seconded by Councillor Duck. Any discussion at this reading? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll agree with this moving forward to public hearing, but I still want to state that I'm concerned about what we're doing in the Galaran neighborhood. My concerns are not about doing an end run around the OCP. It's actually the opposite of that. Those of us who were involved in that process may have recalled that what we wanted to do in the mixed-use village, the implementation of that was as important as what we physically wanted to do there. And that's why there was several policies in the OCP and in the West Lap in terms about how that development would proceed. And that was going to be from the outside in, from Beacon West, Galaran, and Henry. And there were several policies in the OCP and the West Lab that talked about our desire to minimize disruption during the development. So I know that the new legislation kind of threw us a curveball, and so staff have had to react. However, what I'm concerned about, what we're doing in the zoning bylaw is really getting away from what our original intention was in terms of implementation. I'm not saying that we should not proceed with the west, with the plan there for the village, but what I'm saying is I think we need more time to think about how we want to move forward with implementation with minimal disruption. And I don't think that the zoning bylaw changes does that for us. So that's all I have to say on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make a couple of comments sort of regarding some of the letters we received about the severing, because if we go ahead with this, that didn't happen. So, and I think it's important, and it was mentioned in the staff report, that the June 30th, 2024 deadline was always the target or goal of the comprehensive zoning bylaw from the very beginning, from back in spring of 2023, and as mentioned in the strategic plan. And it wasn't, so it's not something that we paralleled to the provincial mandate. They sort of accidentally paralleled it with what we were already planning to do. And as far as some of the letters spoke to council being alerted to severing it by staff, and what I read from the staff report going back into it again afterwards was that they were saying basically that if we could not make the deadline of the provincial legislation, if that became at risk, that we should consider severing it. And at no time then during the process did staff indicate that that was at risk. So that's why we moved ahead from my perspective. And there was one other aspect of it that was not mentioned in any of the letters and seems to have fallen through the cracks in much of the discussion, and that is the R4 Summergate Village. They have a land use contract, or did have a land use contract, similar to many places in the province, and the province has mandated that as of June 30th, 2024, those have to be zoned. So I think that was part of the rationale for that date originally being the date we were going to shoot for getting the this comprehensive bylaw done. And I think it's an important piece to the puzzle that if we were to sever, we'd have to be severing of other pieces, and I think that would make it a little more diluted and not more fulsome as it appears today. So I just wanted to put those comments out there just so it's, from my perspective, that's how I was sort of approaching this whole process and why I thought having it all done in a comprehensive method like we're approving tonight possibly, or after the public hearing, whichever the path takes, is why my recollection is why we should proceed with these two readings and move it forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that carries unanimous. Councillor Novek, would you like to take us on?
Sure, thank you. And I move that staff be directed to advertise for a public hearing.
Seconded by Councillor Duck. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion carries unanimous. Thank you, and thank you to staff. We're now turning to item 5B, 5C, and 5D, and Council will recall that we have given consideration to all three of those bylaws at a previous meeting, given the appropriate readings, and so tonight we're considering adoption, and I'll begin with 5B, Bylaw number 2276, Patio Regulation Bylaw to replace the existing Sidewalk Café Regulation Bylaw and to continue to allow outdoor patio spaces. Councillor Duck.
So moved.
Second.
So,
Moved adoption.
yeah, move adoption. Sorry.
Second. Sorry, Steve.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous. And we'll go to bylaw number 2277, a bylaw notice enforcement bylaw amendment number 2.
Move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous. And we're on to 5D, bylaw number 2278, municipal ticket information bylaw amendment number 3.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to Item 7, where we have 2 sets of minutes, those for our regular council meeting of May 27th and those from our special council meeting of June 3rd. If I could have a mover and seconder. Councillor Duck moves, Councillor Novek seconds. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, who I believe has a correction.
No, it's not for, it's the committee of the whole meeting for June 3rd.
Okay, we'll be together soon. On that one. Okay, any other corrections or any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous. We're next turning to the mayor's report. We have the CRD board highlights. I don't have anything that I would like to extra highlight within those reports. I think they're very full highlights. The one thing I will mention is and I say this every year, so it's the 6th year I'm saying it, but the annual report, the CRD annual report is contained within the links to the highlights, and I think it's a great starting point for those who aren't terribly familiar with the CRD, or just a good check-in with the CRD and the wide-ranging things the CRD does for the nearly 450 residents in the Capital Regional District. That is the 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas. So I'll just note that we're receiving it with it being on our agenda and don't require a motion. I'll turn to the first of 2 council reports, beginning with Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. This report's for the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea. The latest board meeting was on May 28th. And so their fiscal year ends May 31st. And their visitors for 23-24 were 75,600, which is quite a big jump from the previous year, which ended at 70,173. So all in all, a great year for attendance at the center. Financially, they did break even from an operating results point of view, and they did $23,000 in capital investments. For the upcoming year, they've budgeted for another break-even operating year, and they're planning to $80,000 in capital investments, including the wheelchair lift replacement. And they're seeking accessibility grants in this area, and hopefully they'll be successful, because it's a $60,000 approximately cost, so it'd be great if they could be successful in that. They've created a 5-year plan for prioritized capital replacement, because they've taken a look out and seeing some of the bigger projects that are going to have to take place. And so they're looking to have a capital fundraising campaign, and that'll be not this year, but probably the year after. World Ocean Day took place Sunday, June 2nd, and I was present for that. It saw 20 exhibitors and hundreds of people braving the rain, and it did rain. They had 731 visitors to the center, and entry was by donation. It's what they plan to do going forward on this particular day, so that there's no obstacles to people. And they were still able to receive $2,600 in donations. So all in all, given the weather conditions and given everything that went on, it was a good event. It was successful, and the people, I took a walk in the building, and the people were having a great time. So it's never a bad thing when that happens. On May 22nd, the team released the 142 juvenile Chinook salmon and souk. So those big guys are gone now. And the following day, the next generation of Chinook, which hatched in December of last year, arrived at the center, and they go through a process where they have to go from being in freshwater to saltwater. And once that process is over, and it is now, and they're now in their new homes, you can go see the little guys now swimming around, and they'll figure out the direction eventually. They're kind of all over the place right now. And I just wanted to highlight another aspect of the center and what it does. I talk about how it draws people to the community, direct and indirect economic benefits, and the educational component, which is so important for the Salish Sea bioregion. But they also were involved in stuff with Emerson. So 10 members of the center's team were actively involved in supporting the DFO's efforts to monitor Emerson. And if people aren't aware, it's the highly habituated elephant seal that was molting in the CRD and in very public places this spring. So they helped to educate people, helped to keep them away, and just generally did a really good job of supporting and helping that poor fella get through what apparently is quite a painful experience. So, and they also have an animal care tech in their facility. And what we don't often hear about, and what apparently happened about 4 times in the previous year, is they're brought or called out to when marine mammals get into stressful situations or injured, and they're like a first line of defense before they go to a higher level of whatever they might need to get them through, and they provide that first baseline, which helps animals actually survive. So they're doing a lot more in our community than I think we publicly realize, and it's just something to keep in mind that that's a very important service that they offer. And just a reminder that the current exhibit, Drawing Connections, 40 Years of Art and Hope for the Salish Sea, is still continuing. And if I may, Mayor, I just want to take a moment. This is not to do with my report. I just thought about it today. Last Thursday was the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and myself and the mayor were present at the War Memorial at Mary Winspear. And there was a moment around 11, and it was just a brief little tribute done that day. And I just want to have a shout out to Kenny Podmore for being a driver for this. It's very important that we remember the sacrifice that the soldiers made all these years ago, and there's so few of them left alive today. It's really important to have these events, and just want to have a real thank you to him for that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, both for the positive update from the Shaw Centre and about the 80th anniversary. I'll turn to Councillor Novek for your update, verbal update, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First report is concerning VRL, Vancouver Island Regional Libraries. Financial statements have been released for 2023. There is a new auditor this year, Grant Thornton, and they have provided a clean audit opinion. This year, the performance was considerably better than 2022 with a $1.3 million surplus as compared with a $1.6 million deficit. There has been a new Audit and Finance Special Committee that has been struck. I have been appointed chair, and the purpose of the committee is to maintain oversight of the financial situation of VRL for or on behalf of the Board of Trustees. There has been a new appointment of Janet Watts, who is a new Director of People and Culture. The position has been vacant for over a year, but it is now finally filled. And a search is now underway for a new CFO, which position has also been vacant for, well, just a bit over a year, actually. In terms of new libraries, there is a new library being built at Masset in Haida Gwaii. There was a groundbreaking ceremony on April 30th. The design is now over 80% complete, and they're starting to work on the structure, and there is a grant in place to aid with construction costs. And that's about all for VRL. My other report is just a brief one about the Peninsula Literacy Task Force, which is not one of the committees that's in our list of committees, but it's something that I ended up being on, I guess, through the through my involvement with the libraries. This task force meets 5 to 6 times a year. There's a new outreach coordinator this year named Taylor Jernslet, and she is doing a very good job of developing projects to help such things as financially challenged students, school supplies for them. There's a program to provide tablets to, computing tablets that is, to seniors at risk of homelessness, you know, to help them, you know, navigate the world of the internet, which is so important these days. And a lot of this is being done through a literary enhancement fund of $14,000 that the organization just got as a grant. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novek. We appreciate the updates. I'll just turn to colleagues if there's any questions or further comments. Seeing none, thank you again. And we're now turning to Section 12, Committee Reports. And the first is, under 12A, is the Sandwich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. We have the minutes of their May 23rd meeting. It is, there are no recommendations, but I'll turn to our representative on the committee, Councillor Keith, if you wish to comment on anything in the minutes.
Sure, thank you. I'll just highlight a few things. So we did have the Access Awareness Day on June 1st, and that was well attended. A lot of good speakers, a lot of good information. Next year, the Shoal Centre would like to make it a more regional event, because apparently there's nothing else like that taking place. So they're going to do more outreach for next year. Part of that day involved a panel with myself and a few other people, and talking about what's going on with accessibility and the opportunity to talk about what Sydney is doing, and got a lot of positive feedback from people there in terms of very impressed with what Sydney has done so far and with our accessibility plan. So kudos to all of you. Also on the kudos side, so a couple of the members were invited to attend this Disability Association of BC meeting. And what that was is it was representatives from other accessibility committees around the province. And they were kind of exchanging experiences about how things were going on their committees. And one thing that our committee members came back with, that we were kind of leading the pack in terms of what was going on in the province. So a lot of other organizations, not anywhere close to where we are in terms of reporting accessibility issues in the community, our processes for dealing with those, and our accessibility plan. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, we kind of got a jump on it before other municipalities. And also the tri-municipal aspect has helped a lot, and that's being put out as a best practice, and a lot of organizations being told, hey, if you want to know how to operate, look at what is happening here in the Sandwich Peninsula. So a big part of that is due to the committee members, of course, but also to staff, because it takes a fair amount of coordinating to make those things work. So kudos to staff on that as well. Other good news, as we know, Breather Park is opening on Friday, and I believe members of the Accessibility Committee are invited, and so we'll look forward to opening that on Friday and taking a look at the new accessible play structures. That's all for me, thanks.
You want to give a shout out to the time that is? Is that? I can't
3:30? 3:45. Oh, yeah, okay, so kids can get off school and head on over. Yeah, great, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for the update, Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, Councillor Garnett?
If it's possible to ask a question.
Yeah, yes, please do.
Sorry. Through your mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, the part under the committee raised concerns about the proximity of the charging spots to the entry of the Mary Winspear Centre. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what the concerns were with?
Yeah, no, so, no, what they were,
Mike?
sorry, yeah. I don't think they fully understood at first that the reason for these charging stations is, you know, kind of for people traveling, you know, it's close to the highway, the ferries, that sort of thing. So they were wanting some charging stations closer to the actual Mary Winspear Centre building, so that persons with disabilities using the Mary Winspear Centre wouldn't have so far to go. And so, yeah, so, but I guess that would be something maybe for Mary Winspear Centre to consider at some point in the future, if they want to, you know, put electric charging stations there.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillors, for those for that clarity. And so we're next moving to item 12B, and that is the minutes from our committee of the whole meeting of June 3rd. And I better be right this time, Councillor Duncan.
Thanks, it is such a minor thing too. It's in the 8A section of the notes, there are two recommendations there where it says R1 and R2, and it just has the movers and seconders reversed between them. So R1 was actually moved by Mayor McNeil Smith and seconded by Councillor Duck, and R2 was moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Novek.
Okay.
But otherwise, the text of the motions are the same.
We appreciate the accuracy and the correction. Thank you. So we are just receiving those for information. I'll turn to Ms. Nelson. We don't require a motion on the correction. Thank you. And I'll turn now back to Councillor O'Keefe, who was our chair at the committee of the whole meeting, to take us through the two recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor. So committee recommended, and I so move, that boat trailer parking on Weiler Avenue be discontinued after 2024.
Second.
Moved by, or seconded by Councillor Duck. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous. Councillor O'Keefe?
and committee recommended, and I so move, that staff bring forward a report to strategic planning on options for Peninsula boating access.
Seconded by Councillor Duck as well. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I will still be opposed to this. Given it's more thought on top of what I originally, and I guess for me, given the actual report that was presented that night and what we were discussing, I was more looking for a motion that would have spoke specifically to discussing boat trailer parking in Sydney as part of our strat planning. And why I have a problem with the motion is for options on the Peninsula boating access. And I just don't know if that's under the purview of our staff, because if you're talking about Peninsula, you're talking about North Saanich and Central Saanich. So what would staff bring back for us on options in other municipalities, I guess, is where I'm struggling with the motion. Thank you.
Okay, I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Just a point of information, it was seconded by Councillor Duncan, not myself.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with my colleague on this one, is that I think it'd be great if we're looking at our strategic planning to look at this if it's necessary, but certainly if it's on the peninsula, I think that we leave that with staff to discuss with other municipalities, but I think it's a hard one to do because boat launches are a challenge in all three communities, and I think would be hard pressed for us to find a simple decision to that or even location. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Renewal.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I understand the reservations that have been expressed. I certainly recognize that I don't think any of us, look to Sydney to be a further solution to access to boating, particularly in the context of a boat ramp. We are the source currently on the peninsula, and a very large population is congesting to use that one location. But where I am supportive is at least of having that dialogue, because our community is facing the challenge to do with parking, particularly of trailers. And so if there's an opportunity through the strategic planning process to look at how we may work with other municipalities to address this issue, then I think it's probably a dialogue worth giving further consideration to. And that's all this is asking for, is for staff to look at this as part of strategic planning. So I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I agree with some elements of Councillor Garnett's concern about the peninsula-wide access, and it wasn't my expectation that we're going to solve that issue for the whole peninsula, but what I saw it being was at least giving, when it looks at options, I would expect maybe staff would just come back with, here's different places where boats can be launched, just for our information to understand the context. But I don't see us getting into a big peninsula-wide plan in terms of, creating other options outside of Sydney. So I'm okay with the motion as it is.
Sorry, you're okay with?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not sure which way you motivated.
Okay. Well, I had reservations, but I'm happy to see it go forward.
Okay, thank you.
At this
I
time.
appreciate that clarification. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. Since I was the one who initially came up with the motion, and it went through, remember, a bit of word crafting and back and forth with staff on that, having a report come forward was kind of the best option. As I had initially said, we would evaluate striking an actual task force, and they said, let's look at an option report first. So it was very much in the context of, they were saying we were going to talk to the other municipalities, because every time we discuss this boat ramp, we are told this is the one on the peninsula, and everyone on the peninsula uses this. So you can't take away boat parking, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. But then it always comes back to you, but this is actually only Sydney's problem. If everyone else is relying on it, we actually need to start having this conversation with other people. And if nobody else can pitch in any way, then we get to start saying, then you know what? It's just for we're gonna look at this as this is a Sydney problem for our Sydney residents, and we're not gonna, like the rest of the boaters on the peninsula, are gonna have to start advocating directly with their own municipalities or somewhere else, because we can't keep having it both ways, right? where we're responsible for the peninsula because we're the only one, but when it comes down to it, we're going to only look at Sydney. And that's why I want this to be a peninsula conversation where we actually, before we start taking it in on ourselves, we have a discussion with peninsula-wide, you know, boats that represent peninsula-wide and peninsula and other municipalities. So I don't want to end up kind of kicking this ball around again. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll speak for first time saying I'm supportive of it. I don't anticipate this will be a large project, you know, for staff, and I agree that, you know, the Peninsula communities work together on a lot of things. I won't go through the long list, but it is a lot, and having a conversation on a topic like this, I think, is important. We also know that the Wasanich nations, the 4 nations physically on the peninsula, boating access is important to the nations. So one of the nations has had water access in the past, and I think, again, I think it's at the start of a conversation that this motion is intended. So I'll leave my remarks there. Councillor Novek as the last first-time speaker.
Just very briefly, I've been involved with water activities on the West Coast now for close to 20 years, and I think this is one of the largest boat ramps anywhere in British Columbia. And being on the island, it necessarily serves the island population. But again, town of Sydney bears the cost, as Councillor Duncan said, and we bear any criticism that may be leveled, and we have to deal with the parking. So I think it's only fair that we look at this in a greater context, and that was the whole purpose of the motion, that when we look at boating access for the town of Sydney, it will necessarily involve the neighboring jurisdictions, simply because of how things are laid out and because it is so heavily used by more than simply Sydney residents. So I continue to support this as originally planned. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion does carry. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for taking us through those recommendations. We're now on to under 13, under staff reports. 13A is renewal of Crown Lease for the Tulista boat launch. And I will turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Speaking of the boat launch, it's time to renew our long-standing lease for the water lot that allows the boat launch to actually operate. This renewal process was initiated late last year and was recently concluded, and a new 30-year lease, which was the maximum term, is before you for approval.
Thanks, Mr. Istick. Are there any questions of staff, or we could move forward with the recommendation? Councillor Renewal.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation that the water lot crown lease for the Tulista boat launch be renewed for an additional 30-year term.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. We're on to 13B, which is the Harbour Road water main replacement, and I'll turn to staff. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. The Harbour Road water main replacement project was approved as part of the 2024 financial plan. The water main has been designed, and staff went out for quotes for the materials associated with the water main project. The costs were significantly higher than anticipated as a result of ongoing inflation in this type of materials. Staff are therefore requesting an amendment to the 2024 budget or financial plan to increase this budget to $400,000, which includes a healthy contingency in case we do happen to hit some bedrock and require some blasting or other miscellaneous things happen. This is being funded through the Water Main Infrastructure Reserve, so any unspent funds will remain in the reserve. And staff already have plans to look at the 2025 budgets to make sure this isn't a reoccurring issue.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues then if there are any questions. If not, we do have a recommendation. Councillor Renewal.
A question first, if I may. Not necessarily directly related, but if you could just clarify the intended construction period if this were to proceed as planned.
Through to Councillor Renewal. At this point, we anticipate that construction will occur in August. It does require some coordination with Van Isle Marina because they have significantly large vessels that travel over where a significant tie-in is happening with the existing water main. So we anticipate it'll happen in August at this time.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess just given the congestion on Harbour Road in general, that dialogue's been ongoing with Van Isle and other businesses along that stretch of roadway.
Through to Councillor Renewal again. Yes, so we have spoken more directly with Van Isle. However, Public Works staff have been out doing test holes, so other businesses in the area know that it's coming as well.
And the rationale for doing it sort of during that peak season, I take it, is your construction window. Is that accurate?
So I guess it's better to do this type of work during the summer, number one. There's better, obviously, construction climate for it. And we have worked around, again, we have talked to Van Isle, and we believe that there's a window in the summer where we'll be able to do it. The stars may not align, and it may get pushed to the fall. However, our preference is to do it during the summer when the weather's better.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's just it's a busy road on the best of days. I think it'll be a very challenging location in August. So hopefully the communication is open. Happy to move the recommendation, Chair, unless there's other questions.
Yeah, let's put the recommendation on the floor. We can certainly ask questions.
Sure, move the recommendation that the 2024-2028 financial plan be amended to increase the capital budget for WAT 22-002 Harbour Road Watermain to $400,000, funded from the Watermain Infrastructure Reserve.
Moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder. See no discussion. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, a question. Not necessarily related directly to the motion, but like Councillor Renewal's question, sort of related. Just because we happened to attend that session with BC Hydro today about exchanging infrastructure plans and their interest in wanting to know when we were going to be digging up stuff so that they could look at their plans to see whether they had plans for underground wiring or something like that, so that they don't come around next year and say, hey, by the way, we want to dig up Harbour Road so we can put in underground wiring. So do we check with them on a routine basis to let them know that, hey, we're replacing this water main, do you guys want to get in there at the same time?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, no, that hasn't been a practice in our past. We do have a permitting process we have with all the utility companies, so we are aware of works in the next couple months that they have planned. However, my understanding from the meeting this morning, I didn't attend, but an engineering staff member did, and the only major project they have in the Sydney area is around the airport. So yeah, it was really about their large infrastructure projects, not the smaller connection type projects.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks for the question. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? And that carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now turning to item 13C, which is the 2023 Statement of Financial Information, also known as SOFI. I'll turn to staff for an introduction. Good evening, Ms. Chen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Statement of Financial Information, or SOFI, is a routine report that we prepare annually. It must be approved by council and submitted to the province by June 30th of each year. The report is prepared in accordance with the Financial Information Act, which specifies the information that must be included and how that information is to be presented. The covering staff report provides a description and some context for the tables and schedules that form the SOFI report. I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Lots of information in the report. Councillor Novek.
I'm happy to make the recommendation. And I move that council approves the Statement of Financial Information for the Town of Sydney for the year ended December 31st, 2023.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I've gone through this and I'm very happy with the way it appears, so I'm happy to let this statement stand as reported.
Thank you. Second or none? I just want to thank Ms. Chen and the finance team for doing this. You can tell by going through the extensive notes that there's a lot of work in putting the report together, so thank you very much. I'll call a question. All in favor? And that carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no items under correspondence this evening. We do have 6 items of correspondence for information, which we're receiving on our agenda. And we're now turning to notices of motion. And Council, you'll recall that we did have a motion read in at the last meeting, and I'll turn to Councillor Duck to take us forward. Please.
Thank you, Mayor, and just to my colleagues that I have recrafted the suggested motion, but it does not change the intent of the direction we're going to. So I'll read the motion in and then give motivation to that. 1, that staff bring forward an amendment to the OCP in 2024 to increase the permitted number of stories from 2.5 to a maximum of 3 stories for neighborhood townhouse land use designation. And 2, that staff concurrently bring forward amendments to the zoning bylaw in 2024 to increase the permitted number of stories from 2.5 to a maximum of 3 stories for RM5 and CD 45 zones.
Okay, and do we have a seconder? Councillor Novek?
Sure. Oh, okay.
Okay, so council, just, and thank you for putting the motion on the floor, councillors. Given that council could choose to approve this first recommendation and potentially not the second, I would look, and I did discuss with Councillor Duck that we'll consider them separately. So we'll turn to the first motion, and Councillor Duck, if you wish to motivate, please.
Yeah, and I want to give kudos to staff for trying to manage through the process of the OCP and the zoning bylaw in the midst of the province changing gears and places and things to do. But what has resulted in that is we have a discrepancy in the neighborhood townhouse land use designation, and what has happened is Bill 44 is allowing R1 and R2 houses to be up to 3 stories, and this is inconsistent with any transition from neighborhoods. A good example of this is the impending townhouses that are going to be on the Cedarwood property. The adjoining residential properties there could be up to 3 stories if they so choose to develop, and this would be inconsistent with what the townhouses are allowing. The other part of that is that given this, it will give the flexibility to townhouse developments to bring more density to those townhouses by the potential coming up of providing additional accommodation in that 3rd lower story, or possibly even upstory, but I would assume it would be the lower story. So I just think this helps draw together the changes that the province has made and bring some consistency through our documentation in the OCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder.
I have nothing to add, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't support this. When I look at it and I think back to the OCP process, the whole reason that the council of the day, which I sat, wanted the 2.5 stories was to have that sort of gradual going down from size to what the residential currently had, and in particularly with the Cedarwood site, the condo building, the townhouses, and then the homes. I think Muriel Place is the street that's there. And for me, I think the time to have this discussion, if we're actually going to have it, would be next year when we're doing an amendment to our OCP. I think it would tie in better at that point in time. So I think it's kind of jumping the gun here, but I think it's the premise of the whole Bill 44 and the reason for making the change I struggle with, because I mean, I'm not an expert on building, but I have heard builders speak to the Bill 44 and the impacts it's likely to have in communities. And the reality is I think it's going to be years, if not decades, till these homes are built up to 3 stories. So if we start changing what we have now, and the reason we put it in, which was to allow for that gradual decline in size so that we're not overwhelming single-family homes, under the illusion that this is just all going to start happening right away, and we're going to have 3-story townhouses or townhouses and houses on these lots, these 4 buildings or 3 dwelling units on each lot, then that would make sense, I guess. But I don't see that happening. So in the interim, we're allowing what we didn't want to have happen. We're allowing to have bigger townhouses by smaller homes who may not develop for years. And that's precisely what we did not want to happen when we were having the discussion during the OCP. So I can't support it based on that, because being part of that discussion, I remember that being a really critical point for me, and I think as well as others during the discussion. And I think we need to keep that into consideration, that this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. So we still have to be mindful of how these townhomes will affect these single-family homes that will be there for times, probably for a long time yet to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I've got a list here. I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe next, as the first time.
Thank you. I'm in support of the motion for a few reasons. Yes, it may have been at one point, we had the discussion about that gradual sort of transition. However, Bill 44 has kind of made that point moot. And, you know, on my street, I or my neighbor could put up four three-story townhouses. And that's not going to be a gentle transition at all. That's just the way it's going to be. And so I think it makes sense to have some consistency across the municipality. In terms of the idea that this isn't going to happen for decades, I don't share that view. You know, I was over in Vancouver talking to my brother who is involved in the development community. They're already starting to see land assemblies, small developers taking up the opportunities that are presented with this new sort of land form. And we need housing here. And as we know, we've heard from developers that 2.5 stories is okay for townhouses, but 3 is better. And because it's going to be more financially viable for them to make those, complete those projects. And as Councillor Duck says, opens the opportunity for suites in them as well. We're in a housing crisis. I think we need to pull out whatever stops we can to make development of housing more attractive to developers. And the townhouses is a form that we talked about wanting to promote in Sydney because we want to attract families here. So I think it's something that we should do sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to any other first-time speakers. Councillor Duncan, and then I'll speak.
Yeah, thank you. I'm voting for it. I like that Councillor Duck has put forward the motion and recrafted it as he has. I was the sole person, I think, voting for the higher density on the Cedarwood site in the first place, which sparked the discussion about the townhomes. So I'm not changing my opinion about the density that I thought should be on the townhomes or the height anyway. But our item 13B, we've just approved a substantial increase in the cost for our water main because we know the materials costs have gone up so much due to inflation. And so we know that building costs are going up like that for everything. And I think that in this case, for us to keep the townhouse developments at the lower height, we know that that is somewhat artificially suppressing what can be built on that land, and it has that same value, very expensive value of the land underneath it as the surrounding residential. And so I think in the interests of making sure there is an even playing field in terms of project viabilities and costs to developers to build these different types of housings and the different zoning, that this is something that'll probably be important simply because we know that some of these things might require that increased density to be even an attractive building thing. And as Councillor O'Keefe said, I agree with Councillor Garnett that it's not going to all go up overnight. At the same time, we are also trying to make sure that things do get built rapidly because we're in a housing crisis, and making sure that there's some financial viability to these projects. It remains good and even across the zoning types, I think will be important. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Renewal before myself.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know this was a notice of motion, and I take it the mover noted that there was some discussion with staff at the time when this was revised in terms of presented. So if I could, through the chair to staff with respect to the timeline that is referenced here, reading to amendment to the OCP in 2024. First off, with respect to, I'm assuming staff's got time to be able to address that, given that the reference has been made in this clarifying motion and apparently discussed with staff, number one. But number two, refresh our memory, if you would, on requirements around the OCP and Bill 44 and provincial changes and the timeline for that to be implemented.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Renewal. The provincial legislation requires that the OCP update be completed by the end of 2025. So staff's intent would be to hopefully begin that in late 2024. Prior to that, however, we need to complete an updated housing needs assessment. That's a prerequisite for taking on this updated OCP So that needs to be done. Hopefully we'll start fairly soon after the zoning bylaw is complete. However, we still do not have guidance from the province on how those housing needs reports need to be prepared, so we're still waiting for that. When that's coming out is still an unknown, so.
Thank you, and if I may,
Please.
sorry, I see Mr. Humble.
Oh, I'm
had a
sorry,
comment.
Mr.
Thank
Humble.
you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify as well that when we suggested an amended motion to Councillor Duck, we didn't incorporate the wording around the timeline in terms of 2024, and that was purposeful. As Corey pointed out, you know, the timeline in terms of the deadline associated with the mandated or required OCP review as part of the legislation is to be complete by the end of 2025. As he indicated, we would be initiating, or they would be initiating the process for that near the end of 2024. So I guess looking at this, the challenge I would see is when would we initiate this particular process relative to the other process? You know, you could conceivably be having two processes being undertaken at the same time, concurrently at the same time, or at least overlapping, which would be extremely inefficient, at least from a staff perspective, and I think a bit confusing for the public as well in terms of conducting two parallel OCP amendment processes. And to be clear, at face value, it may seem like a relatively minor exercise to simply, you know, amend the OCP with respect to the neighborhood townhouse land use designation, but for the town to initiate that, that requires consideration of the level of engagement that would be required to undertake that. And I can assure council that it's not a straightforward or simple exercise. It's significant, and that needs to be taken into consideration as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, and to clarify, because I beg your pardon, I didn't hear you very well. The first part of your statement was that with respect to this clarifying motion, staff didn't, as in did not, make the recommendation around the 2024. Is that correct, what I heard?
We didn't include that.
Did not. Okay.
Did not, yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And so my you know, where I may find you know, an appetite to support the direction here, and I know the mover made reference, you know, to, you know, a particular development which has been approved and the prospect of additional suites perhaps at that location, and so, you know, I do wonder with respect to this, if we're talking about lower levels and FCL flood construction level restrictions, how practical that proves to be on that location. But nevertheless, my only concern, I think, really with the motion that's before us is the timing with respect to the other initiatives that we know staff and the community have to complete and move forward with. So I'll pause there, having acknowledged that's my concern, and look to other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll speak for a first time. So I'm not really going to speak in whether I'm in favor of 2.5 stories or 3 stories. And I think we need to think back to the process, as Councillor Garnett referred to, the process we had of engagement with the comprehensive review of the official community plan. We introduced a new land use designation of neighborhood townhouse. While we did have some townhouses in the town, we came up with that designation, and we've added the townhouse designation to formally single-family, two-family properties. We did so in a couple of places in Resthaven and over in Galeran. So, and we did that with public engagement, you know, through the OCP process. So I wouldn't want to make a decision on 2.5 stories or 3 stories. Because it's an we're talking about an OCP amendment, and an OCP amendment de facto has a public engagement process, and I would want to hear from the public engagement process in terms of whether it's supportable, going to 3 stories. So my concern is more over process, and Mr. Newcomb in his zoning bylaw report, and again in his remarks, but in the report it specifically stated that staff expect that additional housekeeping amendments will be required to the zoning bylaw following the bylaw's adoption as it is put into use. While staff are prepared to bring a housekeeping amendment forward as required, it is also worth noting that recent provincial legislation requires further updates to both the OCP and the zoning bylaw in 2025, providing an additional window of opportunity for updates and corrections for both bylaws. So I'm not sure why, given staff have indicating that this process is going to commence, it then continues a staff report coming forward in the summer of 2024 will highlight these future required amendments to the OCP and zoning bylaws and identify preliminary timelines for achieving this. So there is a process underway between now and, given that we're in the process of approving the zoning bylaw, we still have steps to consider that. And so to consider a separate process where we're just making this OCP amendment while we're having the other process take place that staff will be shortly commencing, I don't think is reasonable, and I think we should at best, or at most, not best, at most, ask staff to give consideration while they're going through that process to considering 3-story in the RM5 townhouse, neighborhood townhouse designation. So I'm concerned with process. Again, I did forward, because there was some discussion, as we know, between Councillor Duck and staff and myself, and one of the things that I'd given as an option for the clarifying motion this evening was that staff bring forward a report on the process to amend the OCP. And that's what's going to come forward. That's what Mr. Newcomb their staff are going to be bringing forward, which that they've already indicated in the next steps from the bylaw report. So I'm not supportive of giving direction to go ahead and do the amendment. I'm supportive of staff giving consideration to a process and coming back with what they see as the pros and cons and what we consider along with possibly 3 stories. So let's turn back to Bill 44 for a minute. Bill 44, we know, made the very significant changes for the single and 2-family land designation in municipalities. It did not. There are lots of municipalities, including Sydney, that have a townhouse designation, whether they're 2.5 stories or 3 stories. The province did not, in Bill 44, say in your townhouse designation they have to be 3 stories, because we're doing the same thing in single and 2-family or otherwise. They said this is what you're doing in single and 2-family. So it is up to us as our responsibilities for our community and land designation to give consideration with input from the community. So at best, I would be looking to give direction to staff to give consideration to this during the process that is already underway and not considering a separate process. So if that was clear through the wording of the motion and the intent, I would be supportive of that. So I'm now going to turn to second-time speakers, Councillor Novek for a second time, and then Councillor O'Keefe.
First time, I don't think I spoke the first time, but that's all right.
You spoke second.
I did.
You were the seconder, and I gave you the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I have a question to staff through you, and that is, I think what motivated this in the first place was correspondence from the developer of Cedarwood, who, among other things, suggested there might be some economic benefit to going to 3 stories from 2.5, and there was some concern about the construction costs, et cetera, et cetera. My question to staff, through your staff, very simply is, can the developer apply for a variance to the zoning bylaw to allow for 3 stories in his row of townhouses?
I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Novek, they could apply for that, but staff would recommend denial because it doesn't comply with the OCP. So we would not recommend supporting that. It doesn't meet the OCP. So the OCP would first have to be amended before the zoning bylaw. or before a variance could be supported to the
So
zoning
to
bylaw.
clarify, the proponent could bring forward a request to amend the OCP, and then the zoning bylaw.
Absolutely, they could submit an application to amend the OCP, and then they could submit a variance application to vary the height in the CD 45 zone. Typical timeline for an OCP amendment is a minimum of 6 months, given the additional consultation that's required by the Local Government Act and the factors that have to be considered as part of an OCP amendment. So that's important to note too. Plus, it depends what else staff has on the go in terms of workload and current development applications.
Thank you. I'll turn, you had the floor, Councillor Novak?
So thanks, so I guess the value in this is that there's another avenue to achieve similar results. And so that might be something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe for a second time?
Thank you. Building on Councillor Novek's comment about the developer being able to come forward. And, you know, I understand staff's concern about process and, you know, doing one process and then having another one. I guess my concern is that as developers look to develop some of these properties, and if they see that some properties can have 3 stories, and theirs can only have 2.5, I can see them coming forward with an OCP, asking for an OCP amendment, and having a reasonable chance that it would get approved, knowing what our sentiments are, I think, and looking at what is happening in other areas in terms of 3 stories. So although I know it might create a little bit more work, I'd rather proceed, as the motion states, to avoid a situation where we get a series of requests for OCP amendments from perhaps different developers over the next year or so. So I'd rather go in and get it done, and so they can come in and build what they want up to 3 stories and leave it at that. Yeah, so I'm still supportive of the motion for that reason.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to provide a little clarity. So in speaking to a particular development, we're speaking of the CD 45 zone for the redevelopment of the Cedarwood site. Staff have indicated that the proponent does have the opportunity today. They've had the opportunity to date to bring forward an OCP amendment request and a zoning bylaw. But let's not confuse the two, and I separated the 2 motions intentionally. What we are talking about in this motion is making a change in the land use designation of neighborhood townhouse. If we were to make that OCP change, we would still then, we could do one of 2 things. We could leave it up to applicants who are redeveloping in the RM5 or redeveloping in the CD 45 to come forward with a zoning, a variance application. But we haven't got to that discussion yet. Right now we're talking about, this motion on the floor is with regards to the OCP. So I don't think we should be talking, in this motivation, we should be talking about particular zones or particular single property zones. I'll leave my comments there. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the clarification. Again, I just want to remind my colleagues that this is regarding the neighborhood townhouse land use designation, and it's to give consistency from zone to zone. And as has been identified by staff, the process is, even if we go through an OCP amendment, is 6 months. That means that's going to come possibly not until into action until late 2025. Which is putting us, I think, even if we're doing this housing needs, we know we're going to need these housing units. This is going to give consistency across the zones. It's going to give more potential density. It's going to give affordability to those units in townhouse Houston. And as my colleague indicated, you know, this is already happening in Vancouver, where they're getting the townhouse units. And I walked by the one at Malaview and 5th today and saw that could have been that same designation, and giving that affordability to the people who want to move to and own houses in Sydney where they can have a mortgage helper This designation change from 2.5 to 3 stories will give them that opportunity. So I'm still going to remain consistent that I think this needs to be done as soon as possible and this year in concurrence with all other activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I am going to go back to staff because Councillor O'Toole raised it in terms of timelines. And so given the requirement under Bill 44 legislation for us to proceed with further, first to proceed with housing needs assessment, then to proceed with further OCP and zoning bylaw amendments in 2025, can staff actually do a separate process for just this OCP land designation?
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll certainly let Mr. Newcomb and Ms. Verhagen weigh in as well. But you know, if I'm thinking about a time frame for this, and I heard, you know, Councillor O'Keefe say, you know, we should just get this done and move forward. But realistically, I can see if council sort of approves this direction to move forward with amending the townhouse neighborhood designation, I can see it not initiating until at least November, maybe December. I mean, we have a changeover in the CAO position starting in September. Council's fully aware of the major work that's being undertaken. I mean, we're just now getting close to the completion of the zoning bylaw adoption. We're just getting to that completion now. So for us to embark on an OCP amendment this summer, quite frankly, I just can't see it happening. I can't see it happening at all. So now we're talking about, as I said, November, December, and a 6-month process. You know, we're going to be well into, like I said, concurrent processes with both this amendment and the required amendments associated with Bill 44. So, I don't know. I just want to be realistic with council in terms of what I think is going to be a very challenging timeline, and I can defer to, as I said, Corey and Allison if they want to speak to their views on it.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'm going to turn to Ms. Verhagen, give Mr. Newcomb an opportunity, and I just want to touch base. Councillor Umpen, do you have a question or do you wish to motivate? Okay, I'll turn to you for a question because I wish to motivate after that. But Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Just to address a point that I made a few minutes ago about whether or not a variance could be granted to something that doesn't comply with policy direction in the OCP, that is something that we'll have to look into. I'm just recalling some research that we did during the OCP review. So I will have to look into that and report back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Oh, thank you. I think Ms. Verhagen sounds like she just partially answered the question I was going to ask. But, I mean, we were just talking about the impetus for bringing this up now rather than, you know, kind of waiting for it to come out in the wash later when staff started doing the OCP amendment was, of course, that Mr. Milne wrote the letter about the Cedarwood site, and that made us all worried because that project is in progress, and obviously it was a bit of a flagship site in terms of consultation that was done with that neighborhood and the amount of the iterations of changes that were kind of incorporated and working on that. And of course, there's a lot of units there, which will probably be very crucial for us in terms of meeting housing targets as the province rolls those out. And so, obviously, you know, hearing what staff is saying about the concern with the timeline and that it just might not be possible at all, and yet we know that the impetus for that was, of course, that there is a real project with a real potential deadline that if he's, you know, telling the entire truth, which of course maybe some people might question in the public because saying he's a good developer, some people might think is an oxymoron, but I think he is in terms of he's demonstrated some good faith with our town. That if, you know, what he's telling us about the cost for that site, and if there really is a potential of losing this site, and that this was coming up now because we did have an opportunity to perhaps have a bit of a Hail Mary and not lose an important project. Is there something else is there another way that the town can work with this developer to help meet, deadlines if it has to be done? Because it would be a terrible shame if, he does say, okay, so we
Councillor
can't.
Duncan, I'm sorry
I'm
to
sorry.
interject, but we're talking about a motion on the floor with regards to the OCP. The second motion, the clarifying motion that Councillor Duck has is with regards to the zoning bylaw amendment, specifically for the RM5 and CD zone. I think your discussion is more appropriate.
But Mr. Novek just asked about if he came forward and asked for a variance, but he would be flatly told no.
Okay, so.
And if that's true, then what would we
So
do
you-
if we
so
did
I'm-
lose this project?
So I'm gonna paraphrase, and please correct me if I'm not paraphrasing as your intent was, is there a process other than, that staff can work with the developer on the Cedarwood, development application to meet the, proponent's, possible desires? I'll turn to staff.
Sorry, to confirm your question, were you asking if the process can be expedited to be faster than the minimum 6 months? And the 6 months was just a guideline. As you recall, we haven't had an OCP amendment initiated by a private property owner for quite some years.
Yeah, I'll turn to the mover rather than paraphrase. Councillor Duncan, it was your question.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a matter of expediting rather than, I guess it would come to council with staff recommendation that it be denied, and then council could of course choose to a different, recommendation. So that would be, I guess, the answer to that question, right? If that's what council decided, we would override staff's recommendation.
To speak to that, yes, council obviously can make any resolution that council chooses. Staff makes recommendations, then council makes decisions. So, as I said, we will look up that research from during the OCP review about issuing or approving variances that are not in line with OCP policies. They're not bylaws, they're not plans, it's a council resolution. So that we'll look into that and report back.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak for a second time. My previous time I spoke was clarifying or asking questions. And that is that I'm not supportive of this motion as it's worded, to undertake a process separate from the process staff will be undertaking. I don't think it's feasible, but there's another reason. We keep hearkening back to the Cedarwood redevelopment, the CD45 zone. The applicant came forward at a previous zoning bylaw meeting and made a request that we amend the zoning bylaw in a certain fashion so that that would be in place by the end of, if we do conclude the process by the end of June, then it would be in place for the proponent and the development, if we had gone forward and made that. But staff made a recommendation, and council to date has not amended the zoning bylaw to facilitate that requested change by the proponent. If the proponent is aware of that, they know that they're required to do an OCP amendment and or a zoning bylaw amendment, and they know the process could be a number of months. We do not know. We have not heard from the proponent in terms of what their timeline is for the Cedarwood development. So I find ourselves speaking in some ways on behalf that this is in the interest of the developer. I think we need to leave it to the proponent to come forward. They've expressed their intent or their wishes previously. We have not carried forward with that, and so there are other options to move forward. So I'm indicating I'm not supportive of the motion, either with the 2024 date in it or just stating a process. I would be supportive of requesting staff to bring forward a report in the process that is already underway, but that would require an amendment. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yes, staff have indicated they can initiate this in 2024, which is the motion. Mr. Humble indicated it would be November, December. That's still in 2024. The importance of this is not related. The second recommendation I've got, or motion I've got here, does address the Cedarwood, and I want to keep those separate. This is to address consistency across our zones. And I think that we are offering an opportunity in both our R1 and R2 to have that similar density that R1 and R2 and neighborhood townhouse land use designation would be. That would give equivalency across there, so we move forward with that. So that if there is a small land developer that wants to do it, he or she recognizes they can develop a piece of land, not just taking a duplex and making it 4 units, but can actually accumulate land and designate land where he or she can build up to 2 stories. And I think that's important, and will be reflected in our housing needs study that comes forward, and it will give that consistency and degree of affordability for people that want to move here and have the ability to buy a townhouse that with a mortgage helper. And I think those 3 stories allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my thought would be you can still have consistency with the change if you wait to do it in the major project that's supposed to be done next year anyways. I don't see why we would need to do this twice. If this is a change that can be initiated through the process that's supposed to take place next year anyways. I don't see using staff resources to do something and then when it could be done anyways. And if time is not of the essence in terms of this particular site that's being bountied about in discussion, and you're just talking about generally for the community and what's best for it, then it can still be done in one process. So I agree with the mayor. I don't see the logic in it. Unless we're promoting one particular thing and it's a time-sensitive matter, why it can't be conducted under one OCP amendment review that's supposed to take place provincially mandated next year. And I have major concerns with overbearing on staff in terms of what they already have. Once this process is finished, and we're not even done it yet, the zoning bylaw, we have a housing needs report they don't even have details of yet that they have to be done. So even if we were to bring this forward, it's going to take a back seat because the provincially mandated stuff has to be done on their timeline. And there's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. So we can throw this in there, but if there's timelines, and who knows, they may come up with another timeline next month. That's the way things have been going. And all of a sudden, they start whatever this process you want to have them start, and it stops anyways. Whereas if it's involved in the whole envelope of what's required under the provincial mandate, then it will be done. And it'll be done in a time that makes sense. I'm just thrown by... And I'm also thrown by the fact that we're just assuming that if we allow 3-level townhomes, they're going to be affordable. Everybody's going to put a suite in them. We have townhomes in this community where they were granted extra stories, and they do not have suites, and they're not affordable. So I think that's a stretch for me. I don't think that's going to necessarily... It provides the potential for it, but it's not going to necessarily happen because it has not been the case so far in our community. So I think it's a little dangerous to go down that path. But overall, my concern at this point is with overburdening of staff and doubling up on something that has to be done anyways. And so I still will not support the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Call the question.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, and Councillor Renewal are opposed. The motion is defeated. Given defeat of the motion, we won't proceed to the second motion because the zoning bylaw cannot be amended without the OCP being amended. So we are through the notice of motion. We're now on item 17, which is a motion to go on camera. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters regarding the acquisition, disposition, and expropriation of land or improvements pursuant to section 90.1E of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Duck is seconded. All in favor? Motion carries. A motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Novek. All in favor? We are adjourned. We'll recess for 5 minutes. Thank you.